Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Alabama. Hello, everybody. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about getting his kids to adhere to a more reasonable bedtime so that he himself can go to bed earlier. And then we've got a lightning round question about the influences that are stopping you from getting the rest you need. That's followed by our Right Here, Right Now segment and a listener tip. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 452. That's the full 2-hour episode where we answer twice as many questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because sing along at home, y'all. Advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Josh.
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm a new Patreon member, and I was listening to an episode, and I heard Joshua describe how he goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and I was wondering how he does that with a kid, because as kids get older, they want to stay up later, have more choice about that. And most kids, when they turn 10 or so, they're not going to go to bed at 8, especially in the summer when it's light out. And it wouldn't make sense to put all the bedtime stuff on your spouse, but I'm wondering how you deal with that.
Now, TK, I'm so glad that his name is Josh because I can talk to myself for a moment. What I often do is the only person I give advice to is myself. And so I can say, Josh, here's what I would do. And we could talk about some mechanical things. But before we get into here's what my bedtime routine looks like, which, by the way, I went to bed last night at 8:18. I like to be in bed by 8:30. And although there's sometimes I'll go to bed even earlier than 8 o'clock. And I understand where he's coming from. However, I want to be really careful here, Josh. It's easy for us to blame our problems on other people, and it's really easy for us to blame our problems on our kids. I would go to bed early if it weren't for those damn kids. And it's like, wait a minute. Who's in charge of the kids? Who's in charge of the household here, right? Now, it doesn't mean that I need to be tyrannical, but that's what we think about. Oh, you're just going to go to bed, shut up and get it under the covers. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. But here's what I'll say before we get into the mechanics of it. We can look at the carrot and the stick. Let's start with the stick because most of us are more motivated by pain than we are by pleasure, right? And so when I think about what if I were to tell you, Josh, that if you weren't in bed by 8 p.m. tonight, I'm going to burn your house down. What would you do? You would figure out how to be in bed by 8 p.m. tonight. You wouldn't need a list of the 7 steps. You would just figure it out. Why? Because all of a sudden, it would be your foremost priority, right? Now, if that seems a little mean, and I totally get it, but it's illustrative of your capabilities. We know that you're capable of doing it. Now, I could say something else, like if you don't resurrect George Washington and have him sing a Brian McKnight song, I'm going to burn your house down. You say, well, you just go ahead and burn my house down. It's not possible.
Or you can be like, hold on, let me check out this AI program right quick where I can create a video of George Washington singing Brian McKnight. Okay, anyway.
I think we step back, though, and we say, okay, why do I want to be in bed by 8? Have you just told yourself that I should be in bed by 8? Do you have a compelling enough reason to be in bed by 8? Here's the carrot side of it. Josh, if I told you I'm going to give you $10,000 if you're in bed by 8 p.m. tonight, guess what?
I'm asleep.
That's right. you're going to be under the covers by 8 o'clock. You're going to get into bed as soon as you can because you're sufficiently motivated, inspired to do it. But it doesn't just take $10,000. That's one why that seems totally unreasonable. But what else is the carrot for you? What is really compelling? What is the why? And for me, my why is showing up each morning well rested. And so part of rest is getting a sufficient amount of sleep. I also later want to talk with you, TK, about other forms of rest. So, and why rest is so compelling for us, and why someone like Josh may want to be in bed sooner. So I lay that out with the carrot and the stick. What are your first impressions of that analogy?
First, I really like that last thing you just said about why you get rest and how selfish it might seem on the surface, but how selfless it is in reality. It's making you more available to other people. My wife and I were joking just the other day of how awesome our lives are, how awesome our relationship is when we have enough rest to have personality, right? Because when you're tired, you just don't have your full personality. You're not funny in the way that you naturally are. You don't laugh as much as you might naturally laugh. You're not as responsive to the things that people say to you. You don't hear them as good. You just don't have access to your personality when you don't have rest. And so when you push yourself over and over and over again to the point of burnout, of being there for people in the name of not getting rest, you're there for them in the sense of physically dragging your body through the behaviors we attribute to being a friend, but you're not there for them psychologically, spiritually, morally, mentally, and you're just sort of like an empty shell. Another thing I'll say is I love this problem because it, for me, captures the anatomy of a problem in a perfect way that I haven't quite heard in any other question. You have here something that Josh really wants. And it's not just sort of like an entitled desire. It's a real need. He's got to get his rest, man. And he's got something that seems to get in his way. And he knows that he can make choices to just, bulldoze his way through it and get some sleep. But he would have to do something that feels like he's violating his conscience or compromising his ethical core. I can't do that to my wife. I actually love my wife. I actually respect my wife. I'm actually considerate towards her needs too. And that's part of being a good husband. And it seems like the only solution that I have access to is one that requires me to disregard my core values. That is how so many problems feel. You got something that you need. You have a couple of ideas for what you could do to solve it, but all the solutions feel like you have to be your own version of an inconsiderate person or an unethical person. And so I think if you can get this right, if you can look at a situation like this and find a way to think about it that's constructive and creative, it offers a tremendous amount of value because you can then apply that to other types of problems that have the same anatomical structure as this one.
Let's get practical for a moment with Josh's issue that he has here. There's a problem and there's a perceived problem. The perceived problem is I can't get my kids to go to bed early. Therefore, that domino needs to fall in order for me to go to bed early, right? And I think about in my own house, we have bedtimes, and Ella, who's 11, she has a bedtime, and there are consequences when that bedtime doesn't roll around. She likes to be read to at night. And she knows that that door is going to be shut and the lights are going to be out by 8:30. That's it. And so if you want to be read to, we'll read to you for 45 minutes. If you're in bed at 7:45. If you're in bed at 8:20, you'll get read to for 10 minutes. And so there is a real consequence on the other side of that. And there can be protesting, there can be frustration with it or whatever, but I look at it without judgment. And I simply say, all right, well, you know what? We have 10 minutes now. And even if she gets upset around it, it's not my job to then rebut her upsetness with further frustration and upset. Because I find quite often what happens when we have kids is...
Wait a second. You're talking about this theoretically, but I want to know, is there ever a point where she actually did get upset with you? Maybe the reading doesn't start until 8:20 and she's only got 10 minutes?
It happens quite regularly, right? Because here's what happens. She will want to be read to, but also she wants to do something else before going to bed. And so she has these competing desires.
Oh, yeah.
I want to be read to, but also I want to finish this video, or also I still need to finish the homework that I have, right? This reading or math. And all of a sudden, she realizes that she gets to a point where, oh, I didn't get enough of what I wanted because of what? Because I procrastinated. And I would say the same thing happens with us. Quite often, we procrastinate at night. There's always something else that we would rather do, and we put off the thing that seems boring or simplistic or not as thrilling as whatever is right there in front of me.
We just talked about this on our FAMS call, where a few people chimed in and said they felt the same way, where someone expressed that they get in the bed and they like to scroll. And it feels stimulating. It feels good. It feels relaxing. They're not falling asleep yet anyway. But the next thing they know is one scroll leads to another and 2 hours have passed. And it's like, oh man, I'm going to feel this in the morning. I wish I had gotten to bed earlier. It's so easy to just forget about our true priorities.
Right. And the reason is because we don't remind ourselves of the why. If I put that $10,000 on the table in front of you, all of a sudden you have a tangible why. What is your why? And how do you make that tangible enough that going to bed at 8 o'clock or 8:30, whatever the time is for you, which is, by the way, I'm not prescribing a specific bedtime, but what is the compelling time for you, and what makes that time compelling? It could be just because, you know what, I'm really tired when I get up in the morning and I feel like, oh, I don't want to start my day. If I could just hit the snooze button one more time, if I could just sleep in an extra half hour or an hour. Alabama, you reminded me of a quote recently. Can you share it with us?
It was life-changing for me, y'all. I heard Josh once say that going to bed early was the same as sleeping in.
Boom.
Now, we'll put that as a minimal maxim in the show notes. When she said that last week when we were preparing for this episode, I was like, that's good. Who said that? And she looked at me like...
I'm like, bro, you said it.
And that's something that I've realized a long time ago. And the reason I didn't remember saying it is just something that I've embodied because I like getting up early. Those morning hours are precious to me. I woke up this morning at 3:33. I'm not prescribing that to anyone else, but I enjoy the mornings. I like writing and reading and stretching and having a calm, relaxing, restful morning. And so the sleep is one form of rest, but when I wake up in the morning, I'm easing myself into the day. There's not the alarm blaring and the panic of, oh my God, I need to start the day. I'm already feeling like I'm late. No, when I get up early, I feel like I'm ahead of the day.
So on Sunday mornings, my wife and I usually go to an early morning mass so that we can have the rest of our day for family day. This particular Sunday, she was reading at mass, and the mass to which she had been assigned didn't start until noon. And I remember feeling like I love my morning because I get so much done, but it kind of felt like there was the price to pay of a shorter day because of how late we got started in a certain way. And what you're saying about how going to bed early is the same thing as sleeping in, I would add to it. It's the same thing as sleeping in without the cost of sleeping your day away, because you get the feeling sometime that everybody loves the idea of sleeping in, but it feels like there's this price to pay and we don't want to sleep our whole day away and then get started late and feel like we're behind. So you give it with that added benefit. But I need you to go a little deeper on this question with Josh for me, because I'm still struggling with something. I like your idea about the why and the $10,000 scenario, but to me, here's why that works. And here's why that doesn't seem to be a sustainable solution. It works because, let's say I'm in his situation and someone says, I'm going to burn your house down, or I'll give you $10,000 if you're in bed by 8. All right, cool. I know that I'm going to make my wife mad. I know I'm going to put her in a position where she's going to have to deal with the kids by themselves. And I know my kids, and I know how predictably defiant and annoying they're going to be to my wife and so on. But that's okay, the reward is really good. I can deal with this for one night. So I go to bed anyway. I sleep tight, knowing my wife is mad at me and my kids are just giving her the business. But then when I wake up in the morning, I can say, hey, look, sorry about what I did, but I got $10,000 for us because of this deal.
Right.
Sorry about what I did, but the house was going to burn down. Here's the deal. There are all sorts of scenarios where we can behave for a short period of time in ways that annoy the heck out of our family members and friends. But if there's something to justify it, like, hey, sorry, this was finals week and I had to study for my exams. Oh, it's totally okay that you ignored my calls for the week and that you completely, checked out. I get it. You had to do what you had to do. But let's just not make that a lifestyle, right? And this doesn't feel like it can be a lifestyle. So what would you say to that objection? And how can you get what you need and be decisive in these moments without feeling like you're screwing your family over?
Right. The question then is, how do I get the family on board as well, right? And my first question would be, why are they also not, you're not on board with it, and it seems to me like you're using the family as scapegoats. And I know how easy that is because I've done that as well. If only they were on board, my life would be so much easier, right?
Yeah, it feels like that a lot.
It absolutely does, because not everyone is going to have the same preferences as you. Some people don't want to go to bed early, and that is totally fine. My question would still remain the same. What if I were to give you $10,000 if your entire family was in bed by 8 o'clock tonight? Well, now it becomes a bit more complex, right? But is it still doable tonight? Well, yeah, it's doable at least once. Well, what would make it doable? It's because we have something so compelling in front of us. And what you're telling me is, let's take my family, for example. I have a daughter and a wife and myself, and in the house, it's three of us. And so the thing that is compelling to me, $10,000 wouldn't be compelling to Ella at all. She wouldn't be like, well, what am I going to do with $10,000, right? Now, if I said I'm going to get you a horse, that's a totally different thing. And she might be completely on board with it then. So I'm not telling you to go get your kids a horse, but what I'm trying to say is there is something that is compelling for your kids or something that's compelling for your spouse. And oh, by the way, you can find ways. This isn't where you have to do it every day. There are ways in which you can have shared responsibility. So maybe it's every other night. I want to be in bed by 8 o'clock. How much would your life improve if just every other night you were in bed by 8 o'clock? And from there, you're able to build the habit. Now, if you notice the improvements, for me, it makes it so much easier and so much more compelling to be in bed early as soon as I'm seeing the benefits in my own life.
Yeah, I think about my dad. He understood the distinction between adult business and child business, and he didn't feel the need to inform us about the details of every decision that he had to make. But there were some goals he had that he would enroll us in. He would sit down and talk with the family. Hey, here's something that I need to do. And here's the role that it plays in your life. And here's the kind of support that I need from you. Of course, as children, we do that to our parents, right? Because we feel that sense of dependency upon them. But sometimes when you're in a position of authority, you forget that there is an interdependent element to that relationship where you have chosen to hook yourself up to this human being in a way that does require cooperation. And when you have the power to raise your voice or to set down rules, you can forget that you still need other people's cooperation in order to go someplace together with them, in spite of your power to set rules. And so one of the things I would say here is don't think about your ability to solve this problem solely in terms of your power to just make a choice and ignore the consequences or to use coercion to make people cooperate with you. But you could actually sit down and have a passionate, heartfelt, but casual and non-dramatic, non-accusatory conversation with the family saying, hey, everybody, here's something I've been thinking about and I need some ideas and I need some support. And we got to discuss it as a family because it's important. As the father, this is my role. A lot of the things that you want from me and need from me and love from me requires me to have rest, and I'm not getting it. I want to do this, but I also want to consider you in these ways. What are some ways that we can work together? You don't have to approach every family decision like this because sometimes you just got to call the shots and lead. But there's nothing wrong with approaching some decisions like that. You don't lose power and respect when you do it. In fact, you gain wisdom and cooperation and more long-term solutions that way.
There is a destination here that you want. And if you're clear on why you want it, when you're devoted to that destination, the path will appear in front of you. Now, that path might mean sitting down with the family and saying, hey, would you be willing to help me get into bed by 8 o'clock every other day? I think it's probably a great place to start, right? A great place to start is, would you be willing to help me get to bed by 8 o'clock tonight?
$5 to any kid that can help me get to bed by 8. Oh, hey, Dad, it's 7:58. You better get to bed, man.
I think that's right. And when it comes to yes, I don't want to pass this off on my spouse or whatever, but we do have defined roles in our house as well. We still help each other wherever we can, but quite often, Bex will be in charge of getting Ella to bed, but I participate in that process all of the time. It's her responsibility. I have other responsibilities of my own that Bex helps me out with as well. But that makes, yes, it's a shared responsibility, but there is a primary responsibility holder there, right? And if you can sit down with them and say, you know what, I could really use your help. Would you be willing to help? What are they going to say? No. And if you approach that in a way that is non-judgmental and actually genuinely ask them for ideas, a lot of people who care about you, they actually want to help.
And what I love about that idea of the primary responsibility holder is that it already gets you halfway there. That puts you in the position of saying, hey, look, even if this is a shared responsibility 50-50, here is my goal for the days where you are the primary responsibility holder for that particular task. I'm going to get to bed on these days. And even if you can't get to bed on the other days, getting halfway there with your goal is a lot better than being ground zero. And that usually provides the momentum, the insight, and the opportunity and the rest to figure out how to get there 100%.
Josh, I'd love to send you a copy of Everything That Remains. It's the Minimalist most popular book, and it was really the result of me waking up early, day after day after day, and working on this book every morning, super early, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and realizing that it was totally possible. If I went to bed early, I was able to wake up and create something that has been really meaningful for a lot of people. For me, that was my why during that chapter of my life. Also, we have a new essay on our website. It's called Unbusy. I'm going to be reading that during the private podcast this week. But quite often, one of the reasons we can't get to bed early, we can't get the rest that we need is because we are so busy, go, go, go. I would encourage you to check that out. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Oh, by the way, this is the last chance to pick up the 10th anniversary edition of Everything That Remains. At the beginning of this year, we had this really talented Mexican artist. Her name's Grise, and she designed this beautiful cover for the 10th anniversary edition. It's a limited edition. While we've been out on this book tour called the Everything Tour. So the 10th anniversary edition of Everything That Remains, that will be available for the rest of the month. So about another week if you want to pick that up. We'll put a link to Everything That Remains in the show notes as well. Alabama, before we get back to our callers, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer the Patreon community chat's question of the week.
Yes, indeed. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, minimal maxim. You can find this episode's maxims in the show notes at theminimalists.com/podcast, and every minimal maxim ever at minimalmaxims.com. We'll also deliver our weekly show notes directly to your inbox, including 7 new maxims every Monday for free if you sign up for our email newsletter at theminimalists.email. It's 7 new maxims every week, TK. You know, they say a maxim a day keeps the clutter away.
I love it.
Of course, we'll never send you spam or junk or ads, but we will start your week with a dose of simplicity. What is the question of the week this week?
What's one thing that's stopping you from getting you the rest you need?
All right, TK, before we get to our pithy answers, let's hear from some of our listeners. What's one thing that's stopping you from getting the rest you need?
April said, caffeine addiction and dwelling on thoughts keep me from resting.
I am able to drink coffee at night, and I have no problem with it at all.
You have a shot of espresso right before you go to sleep, right?
I can, yeah. And in fact, beginning of this year, I cut coffee out for the first 10 days of the year, and my sleep actually got worse. I don't know how that is. I don't know why that is. I'm a total anomaly because I know with most people, if you drink, because the half-life of caffeine, I think is like 6 hours, maybe it's 12 hours. And so if you have a cup of coffee in the morning, it's going to metabolize all day. I tend to metabolize coffee way quicker than a lot of people. But if you're drinking coffee after noon, that might be a problem for some people. And I've heard from countless listeners, we did a whole sleep episode where they talked about removing the caffeine afternoon and how their sleep improved from that. Also, April said, dwelling on thoughts that keep me from resting. One of my sleep hacks at night to get to sleep, if I'm having trouble going to sleep, is just watching the thoughts, but not holding on to them.
Yeah.
It's a form of meditation. People might say counting sheep at bed. I'm sort of counting thoughts, but not really counting them. I'm simply watching them as they go by, realizing that thought is not me. And quite often, when we ruminate at night, it's not us watching the thought, it's us holding on to the thought, trying to manipulate the thought.
That's right. Sometimes we go to one of two extremes when we go to bed. One is we go straight from doing a whole bunch of work, analysis, and then we try to go to bed with all that stuff on our minds. Or we work and then we busy ourselves with entertainments and we never take the time to look within and listen to what our heart is telling us until it's time to go to bed. And then when you go to bed, you realize for the first time that day, oh, I'm pretty sad. Why am I sad? How did I not realize that I was sad until 9:15 p.m.? I was cluttering up all the empty space with music and talk and busyness and things of that sort. And so having any kind of nighttime ritual that allows you to sort of come down from the day and be present with yourself, whether it be a shower, an evening walk, listening to some peaceful music, meditating, reading something that's not super serious or analytical, a variety of things that you can do. This is one of the reasons why pre-bedtime rituals can be very useful.
Yes. And so a lot of things I've injected in my life over the years that have helped me go to sleep more quickly, but also be in bed more quickly as well and stay in bed in a restful state. I mean, we've talked countless times about grounding or earthing. I have a earthing mat on my bed. We're actually sitting on earthing mats here in the studio as well. And there's so many studies on how that has improved so many different people's sleep because you're connecting yourself to the earth. You want to go back and listen to our earthing episode we did with Clint Ober. I think that's a really good start there. For some people, it's having some magnesium at night, which helps calm you down. I don't do melatonin personally, but I know some people who do, and they benefit from that. But quite often for me, it has to do with removing some of those things you talked about, TK, sort of removing the distractions. The blue light at night will trigger or trick our brains to thinking, oh, it's still light outside, and therefore it must still be daytime, and therefore it's way more difficult to get to sleep when I've been bathing in blue light. We also turn off our Wi-Fi router at night. In fact, we turn all our electricity off except for the refrigerator and the HVAC system. And so we don't have all the extra EMFs in the house. It feels really calm, almost like when you go camping or you're out in nature somewhere and you're like, oh, there's no electric buzzing all around me. There's no stimuli. So removing the stimuli from the last 2 hours of the evening makes it so much easier to get to sleep and also stay asleep at night. Another little thing that I do is I avoid drinking water after 7 p.m.
Really?
Right, because I don't want to get up in the middle of the night and use the bathroom, and that often disturbs my sleep as well. And so they're just small things. You can go back and listen to the whole sleep episode that we did. We talked quite a bit with a sleep expert about how we can maximize the sleep that we're getting and therefore wake up in a more restful state. Becky had this to say.
Not asking for enough help around the house keeps me from getting the rest I need.
That's important. So we sort of talked about that with Josh a moment ago. He might just need to ask his spouse or his kids for more help. Would you be willing to help me, right? Why is it so difficult for us, TK, to ask for help?
Feel selfish. We all like to be the person who's helping in some ways, at least when we feel like we have the resources or the power to be generous. But then giving other people the opportunity to be generous with you, being on the other end of that, is a little bit more difficult. And so we all want to feel like we're pulling our own weight in a relationship and saying, hey, I actually need you to pull more weight because I'm vulnerable in this particular way. That just requires a little more honesty and character.
And it can be selfish if we're constantly asking other people to help with things that we have the capacity to do. I don't think that's what Becky is saying here.
Right.
Becky's saying, I'm beyond my capacity and I could use some help.
Yeah, that person is never going to be saying, I have a hard time asking for help. That person is just always going to be entitled and commanding you and demanding that you do things.
Susan had this to say.
Sometimes the desire to get one more thing done before I go to bed keeps me from getting the rest I need. And then when I do lay down, my mind is racing. Other times, it's revenge, bedtime, procrastination, RBP, which is the intentional decision to stay up late to make up for lost leisure time or to decompress after a stressful day.
This reminds me of my daughter when she was really young, like 3-4 years old, and she didn't want to go to bed yet. She would always say, but I have to do something first. That's exactly it.
But something was this nebulous, undefined category, right?
She had no idea what something was. It was her way to say, I don't want to go to bed yet, so I have to do something first. And so what I'll say here is we often carry those childlike behaviors, those childish behaviors into our adult lives as well. And whenever I procrastinate, it's I have to do something first. Oh, I need to check the email, or I need to respond to this text message, or I need to watch that show I didn't finish. Whatever it is, we'll find something to fill the time to preoccupy us. And it actually ends up getting in the way, as Susan mentioned here.
Sometimes that is a cry of the heart. When you get to the end of the day and you're like, no, I can't go to bed. I have to do something. Well, what do you have to do? I don't know, but I have to do something. Sometimes that is your soul saying, well, wait a minute. I know that I was born for something, and I was born for something bigger than all the things I wasted my time on today. I'm not happy with the choices that I made. I'm not happy with the way that I lived this day. And now that I know that I have to close the day out and go to bed, I don't feel so good about it. And so that could be an invitation from your deep self calling you to reflect on how you're spending that time in the day so that when you get to bedtime, you can let go because you feel proud about it. And by the way, no matter how many things you get done in a day, you're still going to feel like you didn't do anything if you don't define what it means to be done. Define what it means to be done and decide early on, this is what I'm going to be satisfied with having accomplished. Because I know that no matter what I do, there's always at least one more thing that needs to be done. So I'm making the decision ahead of time to say, this is the done stopping point.
And that has to be reasonable as well, right? Because otherwise you're just going to keep working into the night and you're working past midnight. I define done as I need to finish writing the book today, but I'm only on page 13. Well, you're not going to be done for a long time. So we need to be reasonable about what done looks like today. It's not a permanent done, is what does done look like for today? One more from Jose.
If only I cared about, or if I only cared about me, I would be able to have the rest I need. But I try to give the attention that my girlfriend and family need, so I end up not resting enough.
Another way that we often ascribe blame to other people is saying, well, they need my attention. They need me, right? And there's a component of the ego involved in this. They wouldn't be able to get by without me, right? Or I make their life so much better when I give them my attention. And you know what? They may even be asking for your attention, right? But they may not understand your needs. If you need more rest or you need to go to bed earlier, if you need something, how are they going to understand it? Not through telepathy. You have to be able to communicate your needs with them.
You and I had this conversation one time at the bookstore because we saw a book titled Martyr. And we had this conversation about how the title martyr is only good if someone else gives it to you. And it's one of the things that loses all of its value if you try to give it to yourself, right? Oh, if only I, have to sacrifice everything. That's not a martyr, right? A martyr is someone that's glad to die for a cause. And then we come afterwards and celebrate them for the life they live. I've met a few rare souls who just give. And it genuinely looks from the outside like they don't really think about themselves. And when you ask them, hey, is there something you'd rather be doing? You're always giving your time for the kids and for the parish or whatever, for the poor. And they'll tell you, man, this is what I feel called to do. There's no place I would rather be. And for that person, keep doing what you're doing. Because you know what your conscience is demanding of you. You know what your soul has called you to do. On the other hand, if you're giving, and you have self-martyrdom syndrome, and you're like, man, I guess I just gotta help out the kids, that's not cheerful giving. That's not heartfelt generosity without resistance. That's the kind of thing that not only leads to burnout, but to bitterness towards the people that you love. Get yourself into a position where you can be healthy enough to be generous with joy.
That's so good. How about you, listeners? What's one thing that's stopping you from getting the rest that you need? Let us know in the comments. Okay, give me something pithy, TK. What's one thing that's stopping you from getting the rest that you need?
Rest isn't the goal, it's the playing field. Why do you need rest? Oh, so that I can be there for my family, so that I can work my job, so I can be good on my projects. Well, wait a minute. That sounds like rest is not the goal. It sounds like rest is the thing that is needed in order for goals to even be meaningful. Without the playing field, there is no football game, baseball game, or basketball game. We got to determine the space within which the activities are happening first. And rest is what provides that space. And what stops some people from getting the rest they need, which also happens to be the number one thing that stops me when it succeeds, is treating rest like a reward rather than a requirement. I'll give myself permission to rest if I get all of the responsible things done first. That's treating it like a reward. And you almost never feel like you finished all the responsible things if you're actually a responsible person. But when you say, no, it's not a reward, it's a requirement. There is no responsibility because without rest, everything that I care about is not going to matter anyway because it'll be someone else's responsibility because without rest, I'm dead.
I would argue that it's more difficult today than ever before to rest because we are so overstimulated, but also we have so many options, right? You have infinite options within Instagram alone, functionally infinite. But then you flip over to the next app, you're on YouTube and there's infinite options there. And then you go to TikTok and there's infinite options. And so now you have infinity times 3 and you're in this Bermuda Triangle of social media. And that doesn't count the screen that's on your wall. And you have Netflix and Hulu and Peacock and Paramount Plus and what else is out there? I don't even know.
And Josh, this is all true, even if you're the most boring person in the world. I don't mean to sound mean when I say that, but you have to kind of be a fun person in order to have fun, right? But you can literally be the most boring person on earth and still have all those entertaining options.
Right. And so you're miserable while you're entertaining yourself. My favorite author, David Foster Wallace, wrote a book called Infinite Jest back in the early 90s. And it's literally a book about us and how we are going to entertain ourselves to death. The MacGuffin of that book, the thing that sort of moves the plot along, is a film called Infinite Jest. And they realize they can't actually allow the public to watch it because they become incontinent. They just sit on the couch and they view it until they stop eating, they stop drinking, they stop going to the bathroom, and it's fatally entertaining. But didn't that just predict where we are right now? When you see the people who put on the diaper and they play a video game for 48 hours and they have all the food that's being delivered to them from DoorDash or whatever, we are entertaining ourselves to death. Our entertainment is fatally entertaining because it is so enticing. But guess what happens? It doesn't leave room for rest. Sometimes it's easy for me I could go hop on the couch right over here next to AB and I could pull my phone out and I could start scrolling on Instagram, and that apes the form of rest because I am not, I'm not up and moving around. I'm not dancing. I'm not exercising. I'm not out walking. So it might look like I'm resting, but what's actually happening is my mind is moving at 1,000 miles an hour because of what's going on here in front of me, which brings me to my pithy answer here. The music is shaped by the rest between the notes. You know what's really important in music? The notes. What's equally important is that space between the notes. What is your music? Because in your life is going to be shaped by the things that are really compelling to you, right? But there's also the spaces between those compelling things. Maybe your family is compelling to you. Maybe going out and watching indie films is really compelling to you. Maybe writing is compelling to you, or yoga is compelling to you. But what is the space between those notes that makes the music worth listening to in your own life?
What is that for you?
For me, I mean, the thing that's most compelling to me is writing, but I also recognize that I can't write for 14 hours a day every day. The writing becomes garbage. This is like if you play music and you just play the C chord in perpetuity, what happens? You don't actually make music, you make noise. And the same thing is true. Anything becomes noise. Anything that is compelling to you becomes noise if there's not rest that is baked into the process. You become manic at points.
You know, it's. I wonder if part of the problem comes from defining rest as the cessation of activity. And surely it is that, right? But if we think about it only as cessation, only as pausing, only as not doing, then maybe that inclines us to overlook the vitality that is contained in rest.
Yeah.
That rest is a activity of a different sort, we can think of it as, like, yeah, my body isn't in motion. My mind isn't devoting itself to solving the problems of the day, but there is a certain sense in which I am communing with my own soul, making love to my own heart when I rest. And that energy that comes from that spills over into other areas of life. Does a couple who sits down next to each other without watching a movie and hold hands, are they doing nothing? No, they're doing something very powerful. They're just not busy.
That's right.
Yeah.
In that essay that I wrote called Unbusy, there's a line that doing less is the only thing worth doing. Now, you need to read it in context in order for that to really make sense. But right now, when we're doing more and the key to happiness we perceive to be more doing, more activity, more busyness, more commitments, more obligations, more duties, more responsibilities, just saying that starts to feel a bit overwhelming. My nervous system starts to react to that. Well, what's the antidote? It's to become unbusy. Well, how do we become unbusy? It's not about doing more. You don't do something to become unbusy. It's about doing less. And doing less in this context is the only thing worth doing. And so instead of scrolling or instead of viewing, instead of the activity where I feel like I must be active, whether it's my hands are active or my mind is overly active, maybe doing less is the thing I actually want to do.
By the way, I sometimes fancy that sleep is something that God programmed us to do in order to make sure we fulfill our mission, no matter how busy we get in the day, and that is to dream. Because when we sleep, that's when we have that opportunity to think big, to think outside the box, to imagine the unbelievable. But when we're awake, we sometimes fill it up, arguing with each other, fighting with each other, trying to prove ourselves, trying to become what we already are, resisting life, resisting each other, resisting ourselves. And sleep is this thing that says, no matter how you live, no matter how much you fail in the day, no matter how much you neglect who you are in the day, there's going to come a point where your body shuts down and all of that resistance fades away. And then you will do what you were born to do, which is to imagine something unusual.
You're making me think of there's this great band from Provo, Utah called Desert Noises.
Yeah.
And they have this line on their first EP. And the line is, I don't have to sleep to dream. And it reminds me of my childhood.
Yeah.
As a child, I had a pretty chaotic childhood. My favorite time of the day was when I finally laid down in bed.
Yeah.
And I got to sort of sort through my imagination. I got to dream even before the sleep. I got to dream when I fell asleep as well, but I didn't have to wait to fall asleep to dream.
Yeah.
I was able to lay down and allow my mind, and it was meditative. I watched the thoughts. I didn't know what meditation was then, and I certainly hadn't heard of Hinduism or Buddhism or Zen meditation. But I knew that if I laid there and watched the thoughts, it was one of the most entertaining things. It was so much more entertaining than stimulation that is so ephemeral. In fact, it felt eternal. It felt like I was in the moment, and this was everything right here, right now. Speaking of right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. By the way, we're just getting started. We have a slew of callers to talk to still. But TK, the series finale for Fragments, the Minimalist new short film series starring Ryan Nicodemus, TK Coleman, and JFM, that's me. The series finale is this Thursday on Patreon. Now, anyone can watch the premiere episode. It's available for free to the public at patreon.com/theminimalist. That premiere episode is called The Other Clutter. But Audio Plus subscribers can binge the first 5 episodes right now on Patreon. My personal favorites are episodes 1, episode 5, and episode 6. That's the finale that comes out this Thursday. Check those out. Patreon.com/TheMinimalists. This short film series is one of my favorite things that we've ever done. Shout out to Danny Unknown for directing all 6 episodes of Fragments. Malabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi, everyone. This is Caroline Frank from St. Louis, Missouri. I have been listening to the Minimalists podcasts for years now, and I had a realization today while I was driving, and I just wanted to share it with you all. When you live in abundance of things you don't need, it's hard to still feel like your life is lacking. It is in getting rid of the things that we don't need that we're able to be in a space where we recognize our deficiency. If I have 30 dresses that I hate, for example, I might not realize I need to go shopping. After all, I have 30 dresses. But if I get rid of everything I don't wear, I'll realize I have an empty closet. I think the same goes for the people in our lives and the thoughts in our head and really anything where there is clutter. Sometimes in getting rid of what we don't need, we realize what we do.
Caroline, thank you for that thoughtful comment. For anyone else who has a listener tip or insight about this episode or any other episode, leave a comment on Patreon or YouTube, or better yet, send a voice memo right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com so we can feature your voice on the show. All right, that's the first 42% of episode 452. We'll see you on Patreon for the full Maximal edition, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Questions like, when it comes to buying products that improve my health, how much is enough? How do I declutter my restless email inbox? What do the minimalist home screens on their phones look like? And how will I know when I'm done simplifying? Plus a million more questions and simple living segments over on the Minimalist Private Podcast. We also have an outstanding home tour from one of our listeners this week. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.